The silent cry the stars above Kalara Prime had always been beautiful. For 300 years, the Kalarian people had looked up at those glowing points of light and felt safe. Their world was peaceful, covered in silver forests and crystal lakes. Children played in gardens that sparkled under twin suns. Elders told stories of ancient times when the galaxy was filled with war, but those days seemed like distant myths. The Kalarians believed the universe had finally learned peace. They were wrong. The attack came without warning on a morning that started like any other. The sky split open with fire. Massive organic ships, twisted and alive, descended through the atmosphere like falling mountains. These were not machines. They were creatures bred for war and hunger. The Zinthak swarm had found Kalara Prime, and they had come to feed. Within hours, the orbital defense platforms were destroyed. The Kalarian defense fleet fought bravely, but their ships were designed for patrol and protection against pirates, not against a species that consumed entire worlds. One by one, the defenders fell. Their weapons barely scratched the living hulls of the swarm vessels. The creatures adapted to every attack, learning and evolving in real time. In the capital city of Silvara, panic spread like wildfire. Millions tried to evacuate, but there was nowhere to go. The Zinthaks didn't just destroy, they harvested. Their ground forces descended in waves, creatures with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with hungry intelligence. They dragged people from their homes, pulled them into the bellies of transport beasts, and carried them away to fates worse than death. Deep beneath the city, in the emergency command bunker, High Coordinator Vela stood before a flickering communication console. Her hands trembled as she watched the tactical display. Red markers covered the map like a spreading disease. Every red dot represented a lost city, a fallen defense position, a place where her people had ceased to exist. Her chief advisor, an old male named Torvin, stood beside her with tears streaming down his face. "We have to send the signal," he whispered. "It's our only chance." Vela closed her eyes. The signal he spoke of was forbiddance, a relic from the old days when the galaxy was united under the banner of the Interstellar Council. That council had dissolved 40 years ago when humanity, the most powerful military force in known space, had withdrawn from galactic affairs. Humans had grown tired of being feared, tired of being called monsters even when they saved lives. They had sealed their borders, pulled back their fleets, and vanished into the darkness of their own territory. The galaxy had celebrated their departure. Without humanity's overwhelming power, other species felt they could finally breathe. But now, as Vela watched her world die, she understood what that power had protected them from. "Send it," she said quietly. "Send the distress call to human space." Torvin's fingers flew across the controls. The ancient protocol codes, unchanged for decades, were entered with shaking hands. The message was simple, a plea encoded in the universal language that all species understood. The signal launched into space, racing through the void on quantum bands that only the most advanced civilizations could detect. And then they waited. Hours passed. The Zinthaks continued their harvest. Entire cities went dark. The silver forests burned. Vela sat in her command chair, watching the numbers drop. 10 million survivors. Then 8 million. Then 5. She wondered if the humans would even receive the message. She wondered if they would care. 3,000 light years away, in the Sol system, the signal arrived. Deep within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, hidden among countless rocks and ice, was Outpost Vigil. It looked like just another mining station, old and forgotten. But beneath its rusted exterior was the most sophisticated listening post in human space. Every signal, every whisper, every cry from the galaxy beyond was heard here first. Lieutenant Sarah Kim was on duty when the alert chimed. She had been drinking coffee and reading reports about stellar drift patterns, bored out of her mind. But when she saw the source code of the incoming transmission, her cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. It was a council emergency protocol, the kind that hadn't been used in 40 years. She immediately routed it to Earth, to the high command buried deep beneath the mountains of what was once called Switzerland. Within minutes, the message was decoded and displayed in the war room where humanity's greatest military minds gathered. Admiral Marcus Chun stood at the head of the table, his gray hair and lined face showing every one of his 60 years. He had fought in the last war, the one that made humanity withdraw from the galaxy. He had seen what humans could do when unleashed, and he had seen how the other species looked at them afterward. With fear, with disgust, as if humans were the real monsters. He listened to the Calarian distress call in silence. The desperation in Coordinator Vela's voice was unmistakable. Behind her words, he could hear explosions, screams, the sound of a civilization dying. When the recording ended, the room remained quiet. Finally, General Torres spoke. The Calarians voted to support our expulsion from the Council. They called us warmongers. They said the galaxy was safer without us. Chun nodded slowly. They did, and they were terrified of us. Terrified of what we might become. So why should we help them now? Torres asked. Though his voice lacked conviction, Chun turned to face the holographic display showing Kalara Prime. The planet was beautiful, even now, even dying. He thought about all the times humanity had answered the call, had bled and sacrificed to save others, only to be pushed away in times of peace. But he also thought about what it meant to be human. Humanity had not withdrawn because they were weak or cowardly. They had withdrawn because they were tired of being feared for their strength. But strength without purpose was meaningless. And if they turned their backs now, if they let an entire species die when they had the power to help, then maybe the galaxy had been right to fear them. Because we're better than that, Chun said quietly. We didn't stop being human just because they stopped trusting us. He turned to his staff. Activate Protocol Ghost. I want the Armada ready to deploy within the hour. The room erupted in activity. Officers ran to stations. Communication lines opened to secret facilities scattered throughout the solar system. And deep in the darkness beyond Neptune, where no civilian eyes could see, something ancient began to wake. The Ghost Armada. Humanity's most lethal fleet, designed and built in absolute secrecy during the years of isolation. These were not the ships that had fought in the old wars. These were something new, something terrifying, something the galaxy had no idea existed. In a hidden shipyard, carved into the dwarf planet Eris, massive hangar doors opened for the first time. 60 ships emerged from the darkness, each one a masterpiece of human engineering and warfare. They were sleek and black, covered in adaptive armor that could shift and change based on enemy attacks. Their engines produced no visible thrust, using quantum manipulation to move faster than any known technology. But the most terrifying aspect was their weapons. Humanity had learned from every species they had ever fought. They had studied, adapted, and improved. The Ghost Armada carried weapons that could tear apart living ships, disrupt biological processes at the molecular level, and strike with such precision that they could destroy a target without harming anything nearby. Admiral Chun transferred his flag to the lead ship, the Phantom's Edge. As he stepped onto the bridge, he felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders. His crew was young, most of them born after the withdrawal. They had trained in secret, never knowing if they would ever see real combat. Now they would. All ships report ready. His executive officer, Commander Liu, announced. Course plotted to Kalara Prime. Quantum. Drives are charged. Chun sat in the command chair and looked at the view screen showing the distant stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying. People who had once rejected humanity's help. But that didn't matter now. Take us out, he ordered. Maximum speed. And send a message ahead on all frequencies. What message, sir? Lu asked. Chun's expression hardened. Tell them help is coming. Tell them humanity heard their cry. The ghost armada vanished from the Sol system in a ripple of bent space. They moved through dimensions that other species couldn't access, traveling in ways that seemed to break physics itself. The journey that would take any other fleet weeks would take them less than a day. On Kalara Prime, as the sun set on what might be the last day of their civilization, Coordinator Vela received a response to her distress call. It was a simple message, just 3 words in her language. We are coming. She broke down and cried, not sure if it was from relief or fear, because everyone in the galaxy knew what it meant when humanity came to war. It meant the rules no longer applied. It meant mercy for the innocent and annihilation for the guilty. The Xinthax swarm continued their harvest, unaware that death was racing toward them through the void. Death wearing human faces. Death that had been sleeping, but was now awake and very, very angry. In the darkness between stars, the ghost armada flew in perfect silence, 60 shadows moving with single purpose. Admiral Chun stood on his bridge and thought about the Calarians, about their fear of humanity, about the choice he had made. He knew that after this, the galaxy would fear humanity even more. But perhaps that was the price of doing what was right. Perhaps monsters were necessary when real monsters threatened the innocent. The countdown began. 20 hours until they reached Kalara Prime. 20 hours until the Xinthax learned why humanity was called the apex predator of the galaxy. 20 hours until the ghosts struck back. Shadows of retribution. The Xinthax hive mind had consumed 47 worlds. It had tasted the flesh of 100 different species. It had grown strong on fear and suffering. The creature that called itself the Prime Nucleus sat in the center of its mothership, a living throne of bone and sinew, and felt satisfaction. Kalara Prime would be another easy harvest. The locals had fought bravely, but uselessly. Their weapons were toys. Their courage was meaningless against the inevitable hunger of the swarm. The Prime Nucleus sent out psychic commands to its children. Harvest faster. Take more. Leave nothing behind. The response from thousands of swarm creatures was instant obedience. They lived only to serve, only to feed the collective consciousness that bound them all together. But then something changed. The sensors, organic growths that detected energy and movement across vast distances, began to scream warnings into the hive mind. Something was approaching. Something fast. Something that didn't belong. The Prime Nucleus reached out with its consciousness, trying to identify the intruders. It found nothing. The approaching objects were somehow invisible to its sight, as if they existed in a space between dimensions. This was impossible. No species had technology that advanced. The Nucleus sent out more probes, more scouts, but they all returned the same message. Nothing there. Empty space. Yet, the warnings continued. And they were getting closer. In orbit around Kalara Prime, the swarm fleet floated like a garden of nightmares. 70 living ships, each one larger than a city, pulsed with bioluminescent light. Their surfaces crawled with smaller organisms. Their insides were filled with captured prey. The fleet commander, a specialized creature bred for tactical thinking, monitored the harvest progress. Then reality broke. Space itself seemed to tear open, not with light or sound, but with something deeper, a wrongness that made even the hive mind recoil. And from that wrongness emerged the ghosts. 60 human warships materialized in perfect formation. They appeared all at once, surrounding the swarm fleet in a 3-dimensional cage of steel and death. Their black holes absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Their presence was a void in the fabric of space. To the Zinthaks, it felt like staring into oblivion itself. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of Phantom's Edge and allowed himself a cold smile. Visual confirmation. All ships in position. Commander Liu's voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. The swarm fleet is attempting to form defensive clusters. Let them, Chun said quietly. It won't help. He opened a channel to the entire Ghost Armada. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. You know your targets. You know your purpose. The Calarians asked for help. We're going to give them something better. We're going to give them justice. Execute Protocol Reaper. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The human ships didn't charge forward in a traditional attack. They didn't fire massive barrages of missiles or energy beams. Instead, they simply existed, and that existence was enough. Each Ghost Armada vessel was equipped with phase disruptors, weapons that operated on principles most species had declared theoretically impossible. They didn't destroy matter. They convinced matter to stop existing in its current form. The disruptors identified the quantum signature of organic, swarm tissue, and simply turned it off. The first swarm ship to die didn't explode. It didn't burn. It just collapsed. Its living structure ceased to function at the cellular level. Millions of organisms that made up its body died simultaneously. The massive creature folded in on itself and drifted as nothing more than biological debris. The hive mind screamed. The sensation of losing an entire ship, feeling thousands of minds go silent at once, was agony. The prime nucleus had never experienced such pain. It immediately ordered a counterattack. The swarm ships unleashed their bioweapons. Acid projectiles that could melt through any known armor. Electromagnetic pulses generated by specialized organs. Swarms of smaller attack organisms that could burrow through hull plating. Everything hit the human ships. And nothing worked. The adaptive armor on the Ghost Armada vessels shifted and changed. Where acid struck, the armor became neutralizing compounds. Where electromagnetic pulses hit, the armor grounded and dispersed the energy. The smaller organisms found no purchase on surfaces that rejected organic life at the molecular level. Chun watched the tactical display as his fleet moved through the swarm like a scalpel through rotten flesh. Ship by ship, the invaders died. The Calarian orbital space, which had been filled with horror for days, was being cleansed. On the planet below, in her bunker, Coordinator Vela watched through the few remaining satellites. Her people had gathered around her, those who still survived. They watched in stunned silence as the humans fought. Is this real? Torvin whispered. Are they actually winning? Vela couldn't answer. She had seen the swarm destroy her entire defense fleet in less than an hour. Now she was watching that same swarm being systematically annihilated by a force they couldn't even touch. The humans weren't just winning. They were dominating. It was like watching predators hunt prey, except the prey were supposed to be the predators. The prime nucleus made a decision. It couldn't win this battle. That reality crashed into its consciousness like cold water. These humans were something beyond its experience. It had to survive. It had to escape and warn the greater swarm. It sent the command. All ships retreat. Break orbit. We must flee, but Admiral Chun had anticipated this. That's why the Ghost Armada had surrounded the swarm fleet before attacking. There was no escape route. Every direction led to human guns. They're trying to run, Commander Liu reported. Several ships are attempting to break through the blockade. Chun's expression didn't change. Show them why we're called humanity. Launch the Hellfire Protocol. From each human vessel, small objects were ejected. They looked insignificant, barely larger than escape pods. But as they approached the fleeing swarm ships, they activated. These were Hellfire drones, autonomous weapons with one purpose. They latched onto the swarm vessels and began injecting a specialized compound into the living tissue. The compound was humanity's answer to the swarm's adaptive nature. It was a designer virus created by Earth's best scientists that attacked the fundamental structure of Zinthak's biology. It spread through the living ships like wildfire through dry grass. The creatures screamed as their own bodies betrayed them. Organs failed, neural pathways dissolved. The ships died from the inside out. Within 20 minutes, the swarm fleet was gone. 70 massive vessels reduced to floating biological waste. The Ghost Armada had suffered exactly 0 casualties. Not a single human ship was even damaged. It was the most one-sided battle in recorded galactic history. But Chun wasn't finished. He opened a secure channel to the surface. Coordinator Vela, this is Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Ghost Armada. Your orbital space is clear, but you still have swarm forces on the ground. Permission to deploy our Marines. In the bunker, Vela grabbed the communication device with shaking hands. Permission granted. Please, save whoever you can. Chun nodded to Commander Liu. Send down the Reapers. Full deployment. Rules of engagement are simple. Anything Zinthax dies. Anything Calarian is protected. No exceptions. Asterisk, the Marine deployment pods launched from every human ship. They fell through the atmosphere like meteorites, dozens of them, each carrying 50 of humanity's finest warriors. These were not the peacekeepers of old. These were soldiers trained specifically to fight species like the Zinthax. They wore powered armor that enhanced their already impressive abilities. They carried weapons that could switch between lethal and non-lethal modes instantly. The first pod landed in the ruins of Silvara. The doors exploded outward, and Marines poured out in perfect formation. They moved through the destroyed streets with practiced efficiency. Wherever they found Zinthax creatures, they eliminated them with brutal precision. Wherever they found Calarian survivors, they established protective perimeters. Asterisk. A young Calarian girl, no more than 6 years old, was found hiding in a collapsed building. A swarm harvester creature was trying to dig her out when the Marines arrived. 3 shots later, the creature was dead. A Marine named Chun, no relation to the Admiral, carefully pulled the girl from the rubble. She stared at his armored face with wide eyes. "Are you going to eat me?" She whispered in broken universal language. Chun removed his helmet, showing his very human, very gentle smile. "No, kid, we're the good guys. Let's find your family." This scene repeated across the planet. Human Marines became guardians and warriors simultaneously. They fought with a ferocity that terrified even the Calarians they were saving. But that ferocity was directed only at the enemy. With survivors, they were patient and kind. In the mothership high above, the prime nucleus realized it was going to die. The humans had found its location. Their largest ship was moving directly toward it. The creature tried to communicate, tried to offer terms, tried anything to survive. But humans had learned long ago that you couldn't negotiate with a hive mind that saw other species as food. Phantom's Edge came alongside the mothership. Chun stood at the weapons console himself. "This is for everyone you killed," he said quietly, and fired. The phase disruptor hit the mothership at full power. The prime nucleus had one final moment of clarity before everything ended. In that moment, it understood. Humanity was not just another species. They were the apex, the ultimate survivors, the ones who had climbed to the top of the evolutionary ladder and then built weapons to prove it. The mothership died. With it died the last remnants of the Zinthax presence at Kalara Prime. The battle was over. Humanity had won. 3 days later, Coordinator Vela stood in the ruins of her capital city. Around her, human Marines were helping rebuild emergency shelters. Human medical teams were treating wounded Calarians. Human engineers were restoring power grids. The same species that had terrified the galaxy with their military might was now showing equal skill and mercy. Admiral Chun came down to the surface to meet her. He walked without guards, without ceremony, just an old soldier in a simple uniform. Vela bowed deeply. "You saved us. After everything we said about your people, after we voted to expel you from the council, you still came." Chun shrugged. "That's what humans do. We help, even when it's not appreciated, even when it costs us. Because if we stop doing that, if we let fear decide our actions, then we become the monsters everyone thinks we are." Vela had tears in her eyes. "The galaxy will hear about this. They'll know what you did here." Chun smiled sadly. "They will, and they'll be more afraid of us than ever. They'll see our power and forget our mercy. But that's okay. Fear keeps people alive sometimes. Just remember, when you tell this story, tell them the whole truth. Tell them we came when you called. Tell them we saved who we could. Tell them humanity never stopped being human." He turned to leave and paused. "And coordinator, if you ever need help again, just call. We'll be listening." The Ghost Armada left Kalara Prime the next morning. They vanished as silently as they had arrived, slipping back into the darkness between stars. But the story of what happened spread faster than light. Within weeks, every species in the galaxy knew. Humanity had returned, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to remind everyone of a simple truth. When the monsters came for you, you wanted monsters on your side. And humanity had always been the best monsters the universe ever created. The kind that chose mercy over destruction. The kind that saved the innocent and destroyed the guilty. The kind that answered distress calls even from those who had rejected them. In the Sol system, Admiral Chun returned to his quiet life. The Ghost Armada went back to sleep, hidden and waiting. Earth continued its isolation from galactic politics. But everyone knew now. They knew that humanity was still there, still watching, still ready. And if another cry for help came from the darkness, humanity would answer again. Because that's what humans did. That's what made them special. Not their weapons or their ships or their power. Their choice to use that power for something good. The galaxy slept a little easier after that, knowing that somewhere in the vast darkness, humanity stood guard, silent, lethal, but ultimately protectors of those who could not protect themselves. The ghosts had struck back, and mercy had worn a human face. Asterisk.